Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where today I've invited Karl Hughes to join me on the podcast. And with a surname like that, he might just be my brother from another mother over in Chicago. And after spending 8 years as CTO, building software engineering teams in venture-funded startups, Karl started Draft.dev to help companies create authentic technical content that resonates with software developers. But today he's going to share with me how he transitioned from engineer to team leader to business owner, the skills and lessons he learned on his journey. And also, for startup founders listening, he's got an incredible story where he grew a business incredibly quickly and went from 1 to 16 employees and 200 contractors in just 2 years with no funding. It's a cracking story, this one. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Chicago, where Karl is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Karl. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neil. My name is Karl Hughes. We share a last name, so we've got that in common. I had a little laugh about that before coming on here. But so what I do is I run a company called Draft.dev. We do technical content marketing for companies that want to reach software engineers. So it's a very specific niche, but it kind of came out of my 10 years of being a software engineer and writing on the side. I've always just liked writing and done it for fun. And eventually I sort of figured out a way to merge that software development skill set with the writing and make it a full-time job. And now hire on a team. It started off just me, and now we've got about 15 full-time people and about 300 contractors.
And it sounds like there's a few things to unpack there. So I've got to ask,
absolutely.
What's your origin story? Where did all this begin? Can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or just maybe a moment that put you on this path?
Yeah, I've always liked building things. I remember my first toys as kids were Legos and Lincoln Logs and things like that. I, in high school, started learning to put together and build my own PCs because that was kind of a popular thing to do at the time. And then I think I went and studied mechanical engineering, but on the side, I started to learn to program, and that's how I got into software engineering. And so it's really just always building stuff and putting things together in technology has always been fascinating to me, even since I was really young. So it's hard to point one, exact moment for me. I think for me, what's always been appealing is the merger of technology, business, and creativity and writing and things like that too. And so that's kind of where Draft.dev is such a perfect fit.
And of course, it was that path that led you to Draft.dev. So can you tell me a bit more about the company, maybe the story behind it, and what those problems were that you set out to solve?
Yeah. So initially what happened, I guess I was the CTO at a small startup. I was leading a small engineering team when COVID hit, and we had to take a big cut at that point because we were sort of in a bad spot in our funding cycle. We needed to cut costs. So the engineering team went down to half time. And I started to look for things that I could do to make some money on the side. And I started sort of looking at companies that were writing content online about software engineering and reaching out to them and seeing if they might want me to write. There actually a lot of them have established writer programs where they'll open up applications for you to write. And some of them, as I started doing it, more people started to reach out to me. And so it was honestly just a thing to fill the gap. And pretty quickly, I got more demand than I could handle. So I went, I wound down at my full-time job and went into the writing full-time. On day one, it was just me doing everything from the sales calls with clients to writing the content, to editing and sending it back and getting revisions. But as things started to, the demand continued to pick up and I started to think, well, maybe this could be a real business. I started to hire people for each of those key roles. And so, over time, slowly first brought in editors, then other writers, then marketing people, then sales people. And now we've got a full team. And I really just sort of oversee everything with my directing team.
And I'm curious, how did you find that journey of transitioning from engineer to team leader to business owner? I mean, were there any skills or particular lessons?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it all happened really fast too. That was that's still the hard part. I mean, because I just started this company about 2 years and maybe 2.5 years ago now. And so going from, doing everything yourself to like bringing on a team really quickly is tricky. And it means you have to completely change, or I had to completely change my mindset about what my job is at the company. I'm not, my my best contribution isn't writing anymore, even though I really like doing that. And it was something that, I was good at the beginning. So the biggest lessons learned are, well, one thing that I took away from the whole experience was the importance of getting other people involved early, even if it's just in small things. So for example, what I did was I started off tracking my time very strictly at the beginning. And so I kind of knew how much time I spent writing versus editing versus doing sales calls, et cetera. And I started to look at that time spend and see, where am I spending the most time and what's kind of the most difficult task I have to do on a weekly basis. And could I hire someone just for that one task? And as I started to do that, I started to see some things like writing and editing being this big time sink that I realized there probably are other people who could write this stuff, at least some of the articles. And so started testing that out. Obviously, there were lots of challenges to learn about how to set up a good process for other writers to work in and things like that. But it really was like important to have that time like breakdown there as a way for me to tell how should I be spending my time, or how could I hire in someone and start delegating a piece of the work to them.
Absolutely love that. And I'm curious, do you still try and keep that engineer side alive and try and keep your technical mind alive? Because I think once that stuff's in you, it never leaves, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely still curious about the space.
Yeah.
Now, I don't go in and write a lot of code anymore because it just takes a lot of time. And at this point, I'm not the best person to do it. But I still keep up with a lot of news in our industry. And I talk to a lot of our clients still. And often they're building tools that are, on the edges of software technology. And so I hear a lot about the cool new stuff that's coming out. So it's enough to keep me connected and to know how to what tools are available and what we might want to use or how to build things. But I don't actually, I'm starting to lose the skills of actually writing code, remembering all the syntax and the finer points that real software engineers would have.
I also read, before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little research. I read that you had to learn to sell and close. I think it was something like over $1 million in new business in your first year alone. So can you expand on that and why you think we need basic sales and people skills for engineers? Because it's a refreshing approach, but I'd love to hear more on that.
Well, that was the scariest part to me when I started the company and it started to treat it like a real business, was figuring out that, I'm going to have to do sales calls and it's going to actually be a big part of my day. I'd worked with early stage companies that had hired their first salespeople, and I knew that hiring a salesperson is really hard if you don't know how to do the sale yourself. And in fact, I think it's almost impossible if you're a very young company. And so in 95% of cases where you see successful companies, at least one of the founders or early, sort of contributors was a salesperson or took that role on. Now, I kind of had in my mind this somewhat negative view of what salespeople are, and I think this is common among engineers, and maybe I had seen some bad salespeople along the way, but in reality, a good salesperson is really just a problem solver, and that is what engineers do. And so I approach sales very much the same way that I did software engineering. It's just good communication skills with the client, listen to what they need, and try to see if we are a good fit, and be honest if we are or aren't. And as you do that, as I did that, the good clients would stick around and work with us, and the ones that weren't a good fit, they would say, well, we really appreciate the honesty, and maybe they'd refer us to another client who was a good fit in the future. So it was a huge learning experience. I remember distinctly being so nervous on some of these first calls because I had never just had to sit down and sell my services like this. And I'd go through the slide deck, and I'd get to the pricing thing, and I'd do all the things you're not supposed to do in sales, where I'd be like, well, this is the price, but we can kind of go lower if you really want to, it was all that stuff where I'm shooting myself in the foot. Like I was terrible. But you have to go through that phase to learn it. And what was really great about going through and selling so much new business in the first year and a half on my own was that once I started to realize, well, I need to hire a salesperson to do this, I kind of had a good playbook for how to do it because I had done so many sales calls. I think I averaged at least 4 or 5 sales calls per week in that first year and a half. And so it was a large portion of my day was spent doing those, prepping for those, following up on those. And so as I got a new salesperson in, I had a lot of experience and practice to pass on to him.
Oh man, I was just listening to you there, and so much of what you said I resonated with. I hate all that stuff too. When I'm working with clients, as soon as it gets to pricing and things like that,
Oh,
it just feels so uncomfortable, don't you?
it's terrible. Yeah. And
You-
it's like, we know that this is a business and you have to say how much it costs, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
it's silly. But at the same time, I think it's an insecurity thing. And a lot of sales, ends up, you just have to learn the confidence or build the confidence over time. And so, to me, the skill was knowing that we do a really good service for the right people and knowing that that service is very valuable to the right people and just sticking to my guns and being like, here's the price. This is how we do it. We're very
yeah.
confident that will work because we've done it with a lot of people. But at the same time, you'll get clients who kind of try to hardball and push back and give you all sorts of excuses. And it's a challenge to know how to deal with that. I still struggle with that sort of thing. Like, how much should we negotiate if it's a really good client that we really want to work with and things like that.
100% with you on that. And on behalf of startup founders and small to medium-sized business owners all around the world listening to our conversation today, I also want to highlight that you went from 1 to 16 employees and 200 contractors in 2 years with no funding. So, incredible story. But can you expand on that journey and also any lessons learned from growing your business and scaling so quickly?
Yeah.
It must have been a wild ride, right?
It has been. Yeah, it has been. And actually this year, because of, tech stocks and just tech companies in general sort of slowing down on their long-term spending with this impending recession, it slowed down a bit, which has been kind of nice. I feel like we've all gotten to sit back and like take a breath. But the truth is the first half of this year, up through the first half of this year, we were basically, we did something like $1 million in sales in our first full year. And then we were on track to triple it this year until things started to slow down. So just to give you some idea of how much we were growing and adding on new customers and all that, and growing the team all at the same time, like in that same 2 year span, is really hard. So lessons learned. One is the reason we were able to do that and we had so much demand was we jumped into a market where there was a ton of pent up demand, a lot of funding, and not many people doing the niche thing that we were doing. So that it was right time, right place was a big part of it. And I don't want to say that I didn't do anything right, but I also want to point out to founders who kind of think that, fast growth companies are magic, that a lot of the times it's just being in the right market at the right moment in time and being positioned so that you can capture demand that's unmet. So anyway, just something to think about, like picking the right market makes a huge difference. Then the other thing was, we're a service business, and a lot of service businesses will charge clients after they do the work. So in other words, the client signs a contract, says, yes, we want you to do the work. The service business does, many, many hours of work, and then they turn it to the client. The client approves, and then you send an invoice and the client pays in 30 days. That's called a negative cash cycle. And I didn't learn all this until I made the mistake of us operating in a negative cash cycle for many months and growing really fast. But when you're in a negative cash cycle and you grow really fast, what happens is you run out, you basically don't have enough money to pay all the employees you need to do the work. And so you can get yourself into a really sticky financial situation. You can obviously take loans and things like that if you need to, but that's also expensive and it comes with risk in itself. So about October of last year, our cash balance started to get very low because I was in a negative cash cycle and I didn't realize the implications of that. And I had to really quickly turn it around to make sure we could make payroll through the end of the year as we continued to grow. And that made a huge difference. I think, again, if you find yourself in this a high demand space and clients are coming to you, you're getting new business like crazy, make sure you have the cash to pay everybody on your side before you are doing the work to clients. So, get the clients to pay up front, or at least pay a retainer or a partial payment up front or something to get you in a more positive cash cycle. So that, again, this is like a little pitfall I wouldn't have known about, but it was hugely impactful for us to flip that cycle around. And now we get paid ahead of time, which makes it very easy for us to staff up as we grow.
Apologies for interrupting the interview, but this podcast is brought to you by Flipper, the #1 marketplace to buy and sell online businesses and startups. So my quick question to you is, do you own or run your own online business? And have you ever considered selling your site, your store, your tech, or your app? Well, with world-class combined matching technology, dedicated brokers and end-to-end services, all at the most efficient price, Flipper makes selling your online business simple. So to get a free valuation, simply visit flipper.com/techtalks, where each month thousands of online business owners exit with Flipper. Again, to learn more, visit flipper.com/techtalks. But now back to the interview. And as you said, it has been an incredibly difficult few years, from the pandemic to the economic downturn. It's so difficult for businesses right now. But I'm curious, we're at the end of the year. We're looking towards 2023. What are your biggest challenges right now?
The biggest challenges are always people challenges. I mean, whether it's like for us, again, and this is partly because we've been in this space where there's a lot of demand. And so customer challenges are a little bit annoying, but like at the same time, there's a lot of demand for what we do. And so we've been able to grow because of that. But the hard part is finding people who are willing, interested, and able to kind of keep up with that growth. So for example, and this is a person who is capable of it, but I hired an editor when I first started, and she was a friend of mine who I'd worked with before. And so we kind of knew each other, and she started just part-time editing for us and doing just basic, like very basic stuff. And then really quickly as we grew, I was like, well, do you want to manage a team of editors? And she's like, yeah, sure, I'll give it that a shot. So she did that. And then pretty quickly after that, I was like, well, we're going to keep growing. Do you want to become like a operations director and lead like 2 other managers and all this, and now she's at this level where she's managing managers. And so she went from, editing everything to managing managers within 2 years. And that's a huge switch for, to ask someone to come along with. And she's done a great job. And so, this is like a big compliment to her and her exceptional ability to do that. But a lot of people we hired early on weren't able to make that jump and like to jump into these bigger roles, or they didn't want to. It's perfectly fair for someone who's an editor to say, no, I don't want to be a director of operations. That's a very big deal. It's a very different job than what I expected. And so I think that part, like managing all the people and how to keep their careers and expectations aligned with what we really need in the company, has been super hard. Another thing I noticed is that early on, we needed a lot of hybrid people. In other words, people who could do multiple roles essentially. And then as we got bigger, we could split those roles up into 2 roles. So early on, we had, kind of technical editors who also would edit documents and they'd do tech reviews. And then we realized, well, that needs to be 2 separate roles. And so we had to kind of switch things around on people. And that was kind of hard for some people to go with. And so just all those little things that as roles change, as you grow, you have to keep readjusting your org chart and seeing who's on board for the new changes, who doesn't want to go along with it, or who wants to shift to a different role or maybe leave entirely. And that's just a constant challenge. It never ends when you're growing, or just when you're in like you say, like this environment where things fluctuate every year or 2.
So the big question I've got to ask is what's next for Draft.dev? Is there anything you can share about the road ahead? There's probably not too much you can at the moment, but is there anything you can leave us with?
There's a couple things on our radar at the moment. First, we actually just last month launched a job board for basically for our clients. We had so many clients that came to us and said, we like working with you guys. Y'all are great for writing this content, but we need full-time staff as well, who's not just going to write, they're going to manage, our relationship with vendors, or they're going to help hire other people to do, developer marketing things. So we launched a job board called DevRel Careers, and DevRel is kind of the industry we work within. And that has grown really quickly. There's not a lot of niche job boards in this space, so we're kind of going in early and just going to try to do as much as we can there. We've already started to sell job listings. We've got over 500 job seekers signed up and subscribed to updates. So like that's really exciting because it's a whole new realm for us, but it also helps our clients who are asking us, like, could you help us find people for these full-time jobs? Yes, here's a way to do it. And it was pretty easy for us to spin up. We just hired a person to run it and got kind of a plan in place. And that's been really cool. So that's going to be a big focus for this year's continuing to improve that. And then we're looking at other services to launch as well. Again, we started off just doing content writing, but I would love for us to get into other areas. We're exploring some things like video content or podcast content, all for this market. And I don't know exactly where we're going to land. We try not to launch too many new things at once because we're still such a small company, but we'll definitely do, some experiments with some of that in the next year.
And of course, we are at that time of the year where every self-proclaimed futurist, technologist, evangelist, and ninjas are all filling up our timelines with their predictions of what will happen in 2023. So if I ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball, are there any particular tech trends that excite you that you'll be following closely next year?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm really excited by the potential of things like AI writing tools. So
Yeah.
again, we work in the writing space, and AI has been really a hot, topic for the last few years. But the AI, right, basically these generators, like content generators that work off of the newest AI tools, are getting better and better every year. And while I actually think a lot of people ask me, is it going to replace the work you do, or is it going to, is it going to make your writers obsolete? My answer would be no. But what I think it will do very quickly is be a sort of a helper for our writers. And
Yeah.
what's really great about that for us is we have, 200 or 300 writers all over the world. They're all very accomplished software engineers, but they're not great writers necessarily. A lot of them, the writing is just a side thing for them. Their main job is being a software engineer. And so if we had an AI writing assistant that could help a somewhat below average software engineer become below average writer who is a software engineer become a really good writer who's a software engineer, that would be amazing. And it would save us a ton in editorial costs, in training. It would help our writers get better. So anyway, I think that's one thing that I'm super excited about, seeing that happen in practical terms in the next couple of years. And I think that's very likely going to be something we get to use very soon.
And there is an increasing number of them out there. I'm curious, have you tried many? Have you found that some are better than others?
Yeah, I actually did a little bit of a comparison at the end of last year with 5 or 6 of the bigger tools.
Yeah.
They're all based on GPT-3, which is a big language model that was developed by OpenAI, I think is the company name. So at the end of the day, they actually all come from the same source data and language model. So what's interesting is like the sort of layer on top of that, the user interface layer, is kind of there's a lot of them, but they're all really under the hood the same thing. So honestly, like a lot of them, they're not that different. The different tools that are out there, they really all end up looking pretty similar once you actually get into them. But I think what's missing right now is a good interface that is designed for the kind of technical content we write. Right now, a lot of the tools are maybe more designed for general purpose writing, like higher level, like just consumer product writing or higher level business writing. They don't do really well with technical topics. And I think that's one thing where I'd like to see a tool come out that was maybe specially designed for writing technical documents or things like that, because that would be a huge help for us.
I don't know what you mean there. I mean, if you look at the transcription software, I think there's more and more now, from Descript to Otter AI, but they all seem to have the same flaws in there. So I do wonder if they are
Right.
running off similar software. But
I'm sure they are. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like there's sort of fundamental underlying layers of technology, and then there's the higher level abstractions, and a lot of things we interface with are the higher level abstractions, and those underlying layers. Those are really the things making all the decisions. And you're right, they make the same mistakes, the same kind of limitations and things like that.
Well, we started the podcast today talking about your origin story. We've talked about your success and everything that you've achieved. But of course, none of us are able to achieve any amount of success without a little help along the way. So is there a particular person that you're grateful towards who maybe helped get you where you are, or maybe just invested a little time in you at a younger age and saw something in you? Who would you like to thank? And we'll send a little virtual thank you out there.
Yeah, and I love this question, because I think this is so important and not talked about enough. A lot of times people look at successful people and they just think they became that way in a vacuum, but almost always when you dig deeper, they had mentors and peers that pushed them and whatever. So yeah, I mean, I've always had a group of mentors who I keep in touch with regularly. I have a couple different peer groups of other entrepreneurs and leaders that I'm in groups with that I get with regularly. But to be honest, like if I have to, kind of go back to one person and thank them, my parents are definitely the biggest influence on me. My dad was an entrepreneur who owned his own antique store when I was growing up. And that was a huge inspiration, just knowing that you can go out and start a small business, seeing that in the family every day. It's very possible. That you can treat people well and run a good business is just really, that was always very inspirational. And then on the other side, my mom has always been just a very hard worker and very organized and sort of practical in her approach to everything. And it led us to stay financially in good shape as a household and able to have dinner on the table every day. My dad's a little more the creative, free spirited side. So it was both of those influences kind of shaped who I think I became as an entrepreneur and as a professional. And I'm still, we have great relationships still. And so I really value that. And that's something that I can never thank them enough for.
Love that. And for anybody listening that would just like to find out more information about Draft.dev or maybe just explore some of the topics we explored together today, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, you can always reach out to me via email, Karl, Karl, at draft.dev. And then, Twitter, I'm pretty active there at Karl L. Hughes, and similar on LinkedIn. So we can put those links in the show notes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always happy to talk to other people, whether you're an entrepreneur who's just starting out, or somebody who wants to get into content marketing or interested in this whole technical content world. Definitely happy to kind of point you to resources or answer questions.
And I would urge anyone listening to do just that, because you've got so many great insights you've shared today, from transitioning from an engineer team leader to business owner, the skills you've learned along the way, growing a business quickly from 1 to 16 employees and 200 contractors in 2 years with no funding. If that doesn't set alarm bells off for startup founders out there that they might be able to tap you for a little of your insight, I don't know what will. So more than anything, though, just thank you for coming on, sharing that and sharing your origin story. Great stuff. I'd love to stay in touch with you. And maybe we can have some cheddar caramel popcorn together in Chicago one day. But thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Neil.
Yes, you guessed it. Karl has officially been added to my Chicago cheese and caramel popcorn party. Next time I'm there, there's a growing list there already. I think he's number 3 on that list, possibly number 4. There seems to be a big tech scene in Chicago at the moment. So when I'm there, we will have that cheese and caramel popcorn. No fingers required. And if you listen in the Chicago area and you'd like to be a part of this, please, the more the merrier. I'd love to meet anyone listening whenever I go on my travels. But more than anything, for anything you've heard out of today's podcast, if there's anything that resonated with you, or you've got a story that you'd like to share, as always, I'm the easiest guy in the world to get hold of. Email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you can work with me or just browse through 2,200 podcast interviews. But that's it today, so just a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.